billion-dollar health ideas.
I'm the most brutal.
I'm gonna show you how great I am. I'm so mean, I make medicine sick.
Round 1, fight.
So first idea is basically multi-level summarization of research using AI. And what I mean by this is obviously research is being published at like a ridiculous rate. There's like millions and millions of papers like every year. It's super hard for anyone to keep up to date with everything, including like even actually researchers like in the field. And AI is just getting better and better. So like we have ChatGPT that probably like a lot of people are aware of recently, which is actually very good at, if you give it some text, ask it to summarize, it does a pretty good job. There's like some caveats in that actually it sometimes bullshits and just like makes stuff up. So you have to be a bit wary of that. But I feel ultimately, we're definitely moving in this direction of being able to summarize stuff. A very obvious like application area is academic papers, like the massive amount of content and kind of getting just like the actionable insights out of those. And then the kind of second level on top of this is the multi-level aspect, which is that basically summarizing things at different levels of complexity. Because people coming at this will have different levels of understanding. So you might have a researcher who wants, they want actually like quite a lot of detail, and you might have somebody who just really wants the high level takeaway. And so if you could train an AI to summarize and to basically give like tailored levels to different people. That's like the initial high level idea.
And like, who's this useful for? Like, who's this useful for? And secondly, who has the money to pay for this?
Yeah. So in terms of who's it useful for, I think a few different groups here. So the first group is like actual researchers who just want to keep up to date with their field and struggle because there's so much stuff, and they just want to like save some time on keeping up to date with things. Then there's like a second group, which is people who are just interested in like science-based things, like trying to understand, what's the evidence behind diets, right? So like there's cool stuff coming out in diets. I want to understand what the latest findings are, or maybe longevity as well. Like some people just want to know, okay, what can I be doing now to like live longer? And they don't really want to have to go through their research papers. They probably have like other jobs and are busy with other stuff, but they love like the quick takeaways. So that is like a little bit like a what's it called? Blinkist, right? That thing that summarizes books is a little bit like that. And yeah, actually, so Andrew Huberman podcast, like, which you probably are aware of, right? Like, that is like, it's kind of become super popular in a short space of time. And I think that shows the appetite for this kind of summarization of like the science in condensed formats for these kind of, this like growing audience of people who are just interested in this in general. So yeah, that'll be the second group. And then I think there's probably a third group who would just be interested in like the kind of like real nugget like takeaways, right? In a quicker digestible format. So kind of like how you check the news, you're just checking like, okay, these are top takeaways of like academic research, and you're relying less on humans to like, you're relying less on the media to like go through and like find these things and then present them to you. You're maybe using AI to do that. Those kind of like three broad groups, I would say. The second question I think is, that's a tricky one. So who would pay for it? Researchers, maybe yes, although like, I mean, obviously researchers generally are not like super keen on paying for stuff. I mean, maybe you could try to get an institution to pay for it. In the same way, like institutions obviously get licenses for academic papers. And like, you can access to your institution. Could you also get your institution to get some sign of license for accessing the actual, these like summaries? Like potentially, yes, if you could indicate that this improves research output or like helps researchers in some way. I mean, how else? Yeah, maybe something like a Blinkist type model, like people pay a subscription to get summaries of books. Maybe people would also pay a subscription to get a summary of like academia. It's just like a kind of different source, but it's a similar sort of product to Blinkist. Yeah, those are the initial thoughts. I mean, what do you think? Like, who could you see paying for this? Like, do those sound reasonable?
So as background, me, you, and Stu have been working on explainthispaper.com, which is essentially Morning Brew or Blinkist for medical AI. So let's summarize medical AI research papers in really plain English, use emojis, keep it super simple so anyone who's interested can understand. And I think the feedback we've had from people is like really excellent. People really, really like it and really support the cause. And we've had like various bits of grant funding for it. So it's been super cool. We're doing it all manually, but we have this problem of how do we fund this all, beyond just applying for grants back to back. And the ways I saw, one, to build it up, to build such an audience that you can use the ad model. And obviously you're not going to get probably the same numbers as like a general business newsletter, but you can potentially get a really specific niche of like either scientists, researchers, doctors, builders in healthcare, in biotech, etc. And then you can, I don't know, the ads can be kind of like for like job postings or etc. for this very niche group. And then the second way you could fund it would be to pivot it more towards something that people who have money would find useful. So I think the ways we discussed or like looked into for that would be either speaking to large companies with budgets for things related to healthcare. So you can imagine providing them with summarization or resources on kind of like what Andrew Huberman does, like stuff on wellness, on sleep, on exercise, nutrition, etc., but really focus it towards their staff and kind of take from their wellness/staff well-being budgets, because I'm sure there's stuff earmarked for that. The second way is to make it useful to investors and other people with a lot of money. I think there's a few things I've seen in this. I think there's a guy called Nathan something who does the State of AI report, which I think is quite popular. I think a lot of people read that. And a lot of VCs and other people do these kinds of PDF reports where I think they tend to focus on trends and like what's happened so far and like what's going to happen next year and what's going to get bigger. I personally find them really boring because I think they're so obvious that it'll be like in next year in Q1, telehealth is going to take off, and it's like, no shit. So I don't find that interesting, but I think people with money like stuff like that. So I think the thing with this generative stuff is I think you have to, from my experience at least, like tailor it to people who have money. Like you have to make it useful for them to make some money off it, or make it have so much mass appeal that you can make the ad model. So yeah, I think as you kind of agree, the researcher model or making it useful for students, I just think they just don't have money or they're not willing to pay for anything. I think it's so like, I just don't see a business there. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I think definitely you need to focus on a specific end output, and then like who is it that's interested in that end output and would they pay for it, basically, is like kind of the framing I would take. So yeah, maybe the end output is like some sort of summary research, like trends, and then maybe VCs are interested in that. Like, yeah, that's definitely like one potential angle. I mean, I feel like you'd ultimately have to like validate with these different groups whether that end output is interesting for them. And there's always a question here around what is the advantage of using an AI to like generate this? Because in many cases, like State of AI report, I assume it's like mostly or if not all human generated, and it's popular, but like, what's the advantage of using like some kind of generative model to make the summaries? For me, one of the reasons that, so actually for context, well, with the explain this paper stuff, like one thing we've found is tricky is that we're writing these like fully like human written summaries, which people really like and find like a great way to keep up to date with stuff. But then it's like not super scalable from our point of view because it's very hard. Like every summary takes like 2, 3, 4 hours, which then kind of from the potential revenue generating point of view, you've got like a lot on the kind of cost side that you need to offset with the revenue, right? Whereas maybe if you introduce the AI, you could like really actually whittle down the actual costs, because if a summary goes from like 4 hours to 2 minutes, then actually the like revenue demands to then retrospectively like pay for that time investment becomes like much lower. So I think I would think the main benefit of the AI being in like it enables to scale things from the output point of view. So therefore, even if we're talking about students or researchers, maybe they have like a small budget, but actually in the world there's a decent number of researchers worldwide, and if it's not super expensive for them and the cost for us to create it are low, then there could be a business there. But the issue is really, how much can you automate things? Like I'm not like ChatGPT. I don't think right now, with the current state of play, I don't think you could start summarizing research papers and like sell that as a product to researchers that really is going to be like high value, I think. But are we heading in that direction? I mean, I think so. I think there's probably some technical improvements that could be made as like natural next steps. But definitely, ChatGPT I think has opened my eyes a little bit to like how good things could get, but would ultimately, and then maybe you could like fine tune a GPT like model or GPT into something that's more around summarization in some way.
In terms of using ChatGPT for summarization of, let's just say, scientific research, I like, that quote which is like that a human and a banana share 90% of their DNA. I don't actually know if it's true, but it sounds legit. With a lot of the output I've seen, it sounds kind of like that, where it's like 90% there, but that last 10%, there's almost like this restriction of range, where that last 10% is almost the most important 10%. That's the difference between, say, a really like crappy writer versus a really excellent writer. And that's like kind of where all the quality difference is in these kinds of things. The one thing that I think might be useful with ChatGPT and these language models is, I guess, just the speed at which they can operate. And I have a lot of friends in like consulting, law, VC, and they seem to spend a lot of time kind of passing through a lot of different reports and research and just trying to find research to then present to other people. And I wonder if like almost like a Grammarly type add-on that was in your browser that quickly summarized a 30-page PDF on some AI thing and gave you a nice little, exactly, I was saying multi-level summary. I wonder if that would be more useful. Because the second thing is as well, if you're using this in any serious capacity, whether that's within healthcare, research, or in commerce, you can't just trust these summaries that are being outputted. You kind of need to validate it yourself a bit. So I'm less keen on things that produce a complete output versus things that just, as you're saying, make it just easier for you to get to where you need to go.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to be said for the kind of like human AI hybrid, right? So maybe you have an AI that summarizes the paper initially, and then the human kind of uses that summary as the first draft, and then they maybe make a modification and maybe goes back into AI and it like updates things in some way. Like I think, you could make more of a pipeline around it that's not just like fully automated of, okay, here's the paper, give us a summary, okay, now we ship that as a product. Probably that's, in sensitive areas like with research or anything really involving patients, it's not really going to be the case. You're always going to need that human oversight. So I think it's just a case of basically improving efficiency, but not like eliminating the need for humans. So there's actually a whole nother area which, I could definitely, which I think the applications of summarization in healthcare outside of research context, which we could also talk about. Do you want to go into that now, or shall we? So I mean,
let's do it.
Like, I think there's a bunch of stuff that we as doctors do, which, as you say, like similar. It's the same like in law and other fields where it's basically like a lot of like parsing text and like extracting key points. And I think in healthcare, to some extent, there's a bit of an acute issue in that like our digital systems like often aren't great, and you might have like loads of like old clinic letters, referral letters, discharge summaries, like things that you have to find or things that you have to write that are quite time consuming and like could definitely be done in a better way. And there's ways that like we could already, I think to some extent actually, some hospitals are doing a better job of like automatically populating discharge summaries, for example. Like I worked at a hospital in London that had that. But we could kind of leapfrog the need to set up that infrastructure because this hospital was like quite advanced, and actually just make it more of like an AI-driven summarization, which then could work with quite like diverse inputs, right? Because you could imagine.
Wait, let me interrupt. So a
sure.
discharge summary is when a patient has been there for say a few weeks, and every day they've been seen on the ward round, and there's maybe like 3,000 to 4,000 words of text based on what's been going on, what tests they've had ordered, etc. When they're leaving the hospital, someone, usually the most junior kind of doctor on the team, has to write maybe like a 200 to 300 word summary of what's happened, with then instructions for either the patient or the primary care or GP doctor to then carry out. And it's essentially a really kind of boring task, which just involves sitting through on a computer, sifting through text and summarizing it. So like there's like an obvious use case there for summarization using AI. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, for sure, exactly. So I think and discharge summaries, another thing as well, they're often done by like quite junior members of the team. They're often like quite time consuming, and really like eat up quite a bit of your time. But are actually really important because that ultimately is like the kind of API between the hospital and the GP and like potential future services, is that they will actually discharge summary, and that's like the summary of your stay. And also patients as well, like we'll kind of use that as reference. So and it makes complete sense that if you're recording all of the information during the stay, which in medicine you have to, because kind of by definition, everything that happens should be recorded, right? So if you're recording all of that, the information is actually already there. It just needs to be put into the right format. And I don't think that like really like 90% of that doesn't need a human in the loop. So I think this could be one of those cases where you pass all of that information that's been collected during that day, you create some kind of summary, and then maybe like a human just checks it, and maybe tweaks it. Like I think that makes a lot of sense.
The other example that's really been talked about, like I think for at least a decade, is that having like an Alexa type device sitting during clinics. So you have a 30-minute appointment with a doctor, that then records and transcribes and then automatically summarizes everything that was said. And because basically right now a doctor will have a clinic, maybe spend 20-30 minutes doing that, and then at the end they'll usually dictate or write up a letter which will go back to their main kind of primary care doctor, summarizing what happened and any actions. That is quite time consuming, especially for kind of older doctors who are less savvy with typing and things. So that's like another one, but I don't really know why it's not been done. Yeah, I hear it talked about a lot.
Yeah, same. Yeah, no, definitely I've heard it talked about for quite a while. I mean, I wonder. So I think a couple of things. One thing is probably like the privacy element, in that you're basically then you have like a recording of the whole consultation, which you'd at least need to ask the patients about it. Some might not be happy, and it's sort of like a source of friction, I guess. And like friction in healthcare, I think really tends to slow a lot of things down. The second thing as well is probably the extent to which actually going from that free text format of a conversation into the like structure of the clinic notes. The technology I don't think has really been there, I would say. Maybe even still not now, because actually the kind of free text format of like a conversation is a lot harder to actually, like, picking out the salient points from that, I think is something that human expertise is very good at saying, okay, here's like a long conversation we had. This is like the key points. This is how I'm going to structure it, and like maybe use like history of presenting complaints, past medical history, and the kind of standard like medical structure that this kind of stuff is put within. To be fair, maybe the technology is there or is getting there. I don't know. How would you feel about that as an individual if you went to like see somebody and they were like, oh, do you mind if Alexa here listens or something?
I as a patient, I would love it that then there's a record, and then because you see a lot with the telehealth companies, especially with the telehealth apps where you do remote consultations, they offer you a recording of the consult that then you can play again. I would, as a patient, I'd probably quite enjoy that. As a doctor, I wouldn't like that. I would compare it to almost like, with security guards, bouncers, police people, having body cams on all the time, recording everything they do. Yeah, I would hate that. So I think that's, I think there'd be more pushback from the medical side rather than the patient side.
Yeah, I think maybe the approach here would be you have some kind of device that it doesn't actually store the data long term. Like it records that whole conversation. Maybe then it outputs like the draft letter, and like a guarantee that data is not going to be stored. It's going to be like deleted from the device. That might be a way to overcome this hurdle, because I think I would feel the same. If you know that you're being recorded, like you're never going to be like fully as natural, and probably, I would just feel weird. Sometimes like when talking to patients, you might have like a bit of friendly banter or stuff that's not like the strict professional way of like, okay, tell me what's wrong with you, and then like go through this like sequence of questions. I would definitely, I think if I was being recorded, part of my head would be like, no, I can't, have this casual banter or whatever, which actually I think is probably it is important to be having like a human side, right?
One of my like limitations with the automated summaries, again, I'm I don't know a lot about this, but when using ChatGPT, I think I asked it some questions. I think one question I asked it was like, I think I asked it, how do you get rich as a doctor? And it actually gave me a pretty good summary, and it was basically like, you're unlikely to get rich as a doctor. You need to like start a business. You need it was pretty good. But when I looked at its answers in general, they would kind of be maybe 500 words long, and there'd be I'd say maybe like 100 words of actual content, and then a lot of fluff. It would be like, when you're in school writing an essay and you have to get up to the word count. So I do wonder with kind of the earlier versions of these summarization automated approaches, whether it's actually going to result in more of a headache for the doctors or whoever receiving this communication, where it's been AI generated and it's just so long and it's unclear. Because I think it is a bit of a human skill at the moment, at least, to be to write two or three lines that are really meaningful and summarize everything. I don't think from what I've seen that we're there yet.
Yeah, so I think there's like a bit of a spectrum, right? From one end, you would have like a full transcript of the entire conversation, which if there's like a 10-minute appointment, is not going to be that helpful or like passable to a doctor. Then probably somewhere in the middle, you have these kind of ChatGPT style summaries where, as you say, it's quite wordy, it has the points there, but it's like a lot of like kind of fluff around it. And then probably the kind of gold standard, what we really should want is like a nice structured thing with just the key salient points, probably in that format of like history of presented complaint, past medical history, like any progression of symptoms and like the relevant information. And I think we're definitely heading in this direction. I'm not aware of anything that's like fully doing it yet to that like extent, but it feels, to be honest, like broadly the technical capability is there now, and we would just need to fine tune this for like a medical context, essentially. And I know there are tools like, for example, Amazon have a tool, like Amazon Medical Comprehend, I think it's called, which it's what it sells itself as is something to like pick out these salient things from text. So you give it like a long paragraph, and it will pick out that this is a symptom that's been getting worse for like 3 weeks, and that this is some kind of past medical history, like a different diagnosis that they had in the past, or this kind of thing. But I don't think, like, I've not seen anything yet that is like this kind of far end of the really high yield output that would work clinically fully.
It seems like hospitals and hospital systems don't like paying for, like loads of individual tools. So I wonder if the kind of path to do this is to do one small thing really well and then get acquired by one of the big EHR systems, I don't know, Epic, EMIS, etc. I wonder if that's really the path to do this, like just do something small and then get acquired. Because you can't see something like this being standing on its own. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some truth to that. I mean, one potential angle here is if you can offer some kind of concrete service, which this can be a part of it. And I guess what I mean by this is like, let's say we take referrals, for example, like referral letters, which is a letter that kind of says, okay, this is my patient, I would love you to see them, this is why, essentially, and like requests some kind of appointment. Yeah, maybe one angle of which you described is like, you create some tool that can generate that, and somebody at the point of creating that referral could create it, then that gets used, and then that's like a standalone thing that you want to get incorporated by these existing software providers, so it actually like enable that, so like as a kind of acquisition play. But I also wonder if you could be actually like the wider software provider that services this whole pathway, of which like your tool is one component of it, but you're doing the whole thing. I don't know if I've really explained that like that clearly, but yeah, I think if you can offer something concrete that covers a part of the pathway, of which then this tool is one component of that, that's a potential way in which this could become bigger.
I don't know how much you've worked with electronic health record systems, but how open are they, or how good are the kind of the APIs and other things for you to kind of build a tool and input into it? Because for this kind of stuff to be seamless, you need to seamlessly be able to access the patient's records, be able to make referrals, etc., etc. So you need to have some kind of API, some kind of access to these things. Like, do you have any experience with this?
So I don't have direct experience with interfacing with them from like an API point of view. I have experience with kind of getting the data out of it to then use for like a research context. But one actually interesting approach here, and I spoke to someone recently around this, is that you can kind of get away without necessarily needing the API interface, because I think my general impression is that they're not super easy necessarily to interface with. But one approach is that you can like have macros at like a computer level that then basically operates over the system, but the system doesn't know that you're like querying it or whatever. So you could, and like the way you can think of this is, you just create a program that like moves your mouse here, clicks on patient record, goes into the file, and then like extracts it. And yeah, this guy I was talking to, like his company basically does this for some GP services and automating some of their processes. Yeah, so I guess this actually is like an example of what we're talking about would be this kind of thing. So I think they basically run like virtual computers that have a login for like EMIS or System 1, which are the two main GP ones. And then it literally just like basically clicks, gets the information, and automates some processes around that, and maybe even like acts like it doesn't just retrieve information, it also, I don't know, pings off a letter or something. I think that's definitely like one approach you could take. And then there's definitely pros and cons to it, because the pro is you're not dependent on them like having an API endpoint or kind of officially collaborating with you in any way. But then you're also like quite vulnerable to like changes in their software. Like imagine they tweak the flow, you kind of have to rewrite the whole macro, right? Because then maybe the previous one just didn't work anymore. That's a kind of hacky way around it.
As a side point, what do you think of these kinds of, with businesses, there's always like the main thing, like the main sexy thing. And then there's like these ancillary services. So I think the guy you're talking about, I think I know his company as well. Or maybe this is some other person. But essentially it's like, okay, you're building a startup that needs to be able to interface with lots of different electronic health record systems. That's a huge task in itself. We are the company that makes that possible. Like, you just input your stuff to us and we just make that happen. The other example is people who are building stuff in the wellness space or in the kind of health optimization space. They need to be able to interface with loads of different wearable devices, whether that's your Apple Health, your Garmin, Nike Plus, whatever. And that's a big task. So I think there's a company called, Vital or Vitality. That's their whole thing.
Vital, yeah.
They just make that Vital, yeah. So I always find it interesting when people build businesses around like a particular hurdle, and I don't know, they seem to do really well.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, those kind of businesses, to be honest, I think are like I think could be strong businesses, right? Because then you're basically building shovels rather than trying to like dig any particular type of hole or whatever. I don't know exactly how the saying goes, but like when everybody is trying to, for example, in this case, access health data from different places to unite stuff and build different services, if you could just build the shovel that everybody wants to use, like, you're in a very good position as a business. And actually, interestingly, so there's Vital, but there's also, I've seen at least 2 other companies also out of YC, basically all pretty much doing exactly the same thing. So obviously a few people are having a similar idea at the same time, which makes sense. Is kind of representative of the times right now, I think. That people are all thinking about this like aggregation of health data and combination of health data. But yeah, no, I'm generally like quite bullish on these kind of approaches of building some genuinely needed infrastructure that enables other people to do stuff. And like, maybe it's a bit of a tangent, but when I was thinking, I mean, I'm always thinking about like what sort of directions to go from like a startup perspective. But when I was looking at, okay, what kind of things could I build that would support machine learning application in healthcare? Like, one angle is you think of a specific use case, like, I don't know, let's say like CTs, you want to do some AI that analyzes CTs and triages or decides whether you need that thrombolized or something for stroke. That's like a specific application. And there's like many, many different specific applications you could do. But then the other angle is, okay, is there something I could do that could ultimately enable more ML algorithms to be built? Which you could definitely make the argument that the like enabler, you actually probably have a larger impact, right? Because imagine that there's like 20 different radiology AI startups who all have like cool ideas, and they all make sense and could be used and could impact like clinical workflows. But there's like one blocker that they all have. If you can just build that blocker, then like you've kind of enabled 20 companies to really come to fruition versus like building one of those 20 companies. That was like at least the way I kind of think about it. So yeah, I would say broadly I'm pretty bullish on like enabler plays, or I don't know how you would call it, but this kind of thing of like enabling other people to do stuff. Yeah. So I rate that.
I guess the problem is that you become your value to the world becomes more abstract, at least on a personal level, to justify what you. I don't know. I think it's cooler to kind of build the thing rather than be enabling other people. But yeah, I totally agree with you.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. I mean, you need both, right? So it's good.
Yeah. True. Do you have any other thoughts on automation, summarization, or even generative AI, or do you want to move on?
No, I think that's we've covered most of it. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so I've got this idea that I want to talk about.
Round 2, fight.
So this is direct-to-consumer weight loss clinics. So weight loss, right? So most of the Western world now, or many people in the Western world, are too fat, and I think smoking gets a really bad rep. But I saw this paper that was essentially talking about whether smoking, poverty, or being obese were a bigger kind of detriment to your physical health. And surprisingly, being obese is the worst one. Smoking has like all the negative PR, but being obese is even worse. I think the stat I saw was that 1 billion people now in the world are obese. And when we look at lifespan as well, especially in the developed nations like the UK and US, we're starting to level off for the first time. So I think it's leveling off around 78, 80. And, there will be some cool new developments, some cool new therapeutics, but essentially, I think it's coming down to prevention and lifestyle. That's really the kind of bottleneck in why we're not improving our nation's health, and why maybe it's even getting worse. for many people in the Western world, I think, especially, you know, if you are overweight, the single best health intervention you could have to your physical health and probably your mental health is to come down to a healthy weight. So yeah, being obese is obviously not good. Most people don't want to be obese, but you just can't do it. I mean, Chris, you're in great shape. I've definitely got 7 or 8 kilos on me that need to come off. So I struggle with it as well. And the other thing is that diets don't work. So I saw this BMJ 2020 meta-analysis, which is like the granddaddy of evidence. And it looked at like 20, 30 different trials done with diets. So it looked at like Atkins, keto, vegan, intermittent fasting, just every type of diet. And basically all of them after 6 months, you've lost a little bit of weight. By 12 months, almost everyone has put it back on. So dieting just objectively just doesn't work. I mean, it's a nice, I mean, in theory, like mechanistically it would work, like eat less than you're burning. So mechanistically it should work, but it just doesn't work in real life. So what's the solution to this? Currently, I think we kind of advise, lifestyle interventions, diets, just change stuff, make it easier, behavioral interventions. And again, at least in a medical context, I don't know what your experience of this was, but I just don't think it works. It's really hard to take someone who's 50 or 60 years old and make them make a complete U-turn in their health and just be like, just everything you've been doing so far is wrong. Just do the complete opposite thing and you will be healthy. Did you work in like GP or primary care? Did you like notice that people kind of lost weight and things? Like, I've just never seen it happen.
I think I have seen it, but it's really like a very small percentage of all cases, right? Like so many people will try, and then ultimately, yeah, if you look at like what happens in the long term, there won't be much of a change. And then there's a small minority of people who do like have like a very, very big impact. But then actually they're the ones who will, when you see these adverts for like a different diet, they'll be like, oh, look at this person, they did this, but they're really like outliers. Like I haven't seen the data, but I imagine it's like, less than a few percent, right, will actually have some kind of transformative impact. Yeah. And there's definitely kind of multiple facets here, right? In that so much of it is a behavioral thing. There's like, physiological elements. There's like a kind of educational element of knowing actually what is like a good diet, which to some extent, is still not defined. There have been some very interesting progress in this as like a research field in the last 5 years or so, which could be interesting for us to talk about. But yeah, it feels like it's hard for many reasons. I think it's very personalized to each individual person. I think so much of it is behavioral, and it's not like superficial behavioral in the way that so CBT is really good for like kind of making superficial adjustments to
so that's therapy basically. Stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But then, yeah, sorry, you kind of explain the context of CBT, which is like cognitive behavioral therapy, is like a 6-week program, typically focused on, for example, like helping with depression, helping with anxiety, but it's focused more at the level of what are your like thought patterns, what kind of behaviors are you making, rather than, doesn't really like go deep into, okay, why are you feeling this way, and yeah, kind of really basically going like deep into the underlying stuff behind it, which is actually very effective for like various different conditions. But I feel like in weight loss, I don't know, like it feels like that's maybe not enough. And you need to go deeper and go like more personalized, I think, from the behavioral point of view.
Yeah, and that's the kind of academic argument for why weight loss is a big problem and why it's a great opportunity. Let me make the emotional case for it as well, or appeal to the heart as well. I think if you speak to 90% of adults, they basically would like to lose a bit of fat and gain a bit of muscle. Most people, I would say, would enjoy that if they could flip a switch and that would happen. There's this really interesting framework. I don't know which investor said it, but it's called the 7 Deadly Sins framework. And essentially, this investor says that he only invests in businesses that target one of the 7 deadly sins. And I think weight loss is great because it actually targets 2 of them. So one of them is pride. So just having a pride in your appearance and like looking good, that's a great thing to do. And then also gluttony. Like if I want to lose weight, but I want to eat Pizza Hut beef sizzler pizza like twice a week as well. So if I can do both of those things at the same time, then that's excellent. And there's been a lot of like negativity towards this like a pill for everything approach, especially in America, where it seems to have contributed to the opioid crisis. But I think it's great. So what's the solution to all of this? Well, there are two new hot drugs that have come out. One is called semaglutide, and the other one is called tirzepatide. I think my pronunciation's okay on those. But essentially, these are diabetic drugs, and people notice that when you give them to people with diabetes, they lose weight. So the next kind of thesis was that what if you give it to someone who's not diabetic? You give it to like a normal person and see what happens. And two trials have been done in the New England Journal of Medicine, which again is like it's like the Michael Jordan of medical journals. And in both of them, non-diabetic people who took these drugs, which are a once weekly injection, they lost 15 to 20% of their body weight, which is incredible. So that was after 6 months. They haven't, I believe, done the long-term stuff yet, but I believe one of the trials is actually carrying on for 2 years, so that'll be interesting to see. But just the fact that you can give someone a once weekly injection and they'll lose 15 to 20% of their body weight is absolutely exceptional. And from this, a load of these direct-to-consumer clinics have cropped up. So it's a clinic, you just go onto a website, you have a consult with a doctor, and then they prescribe you this drug and you take it once a week. And you may or may not get some therapy alongside that. And they charge, I think in the UK, it's something like £150 a month. So in the US, I imagine it'd be something like $100 to $200 a month to do this. And what I like about it is that it's basically almost a guaranteed way of losing weight. Like everything else, whether you get a coach, a PT, you go on some new diet, you get some more accountability, like maybe it will work, maybe it won't, but this is literally like a guaranteed way to lose weight. So I think these are excellent. So yeah, I've got some more to say, but what do you think?
Yeah, okay, so I wasn't aware of these trials, to be honest. So yeah, I mean, it sounds good, right? Like if it's a case of taking injections and cutting weight loss and it's like consistent across different people, like yeah, did they give any ideas around the like mechanism of action here? Or I know you mentioned they're both like glutide type things, which if I remember correctly is something to do with one of the receptors, like or glue transformers or something like that, glue transporters.
Yeah, I think one of them at least. I think it's a GLP-1 agonist. I said like the simplistic, at least my understanding of it is that they basically make you feel less hungry. I think downstream they affect ghrelin or leptin somehow, but basically you just feel less hungry. That's it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if it works, like makes sense. But then so with what's the value add here of a direct-to-consumer clinic versus like going, to a GP? Or I mean, I assume if it's quite cutting edge, maybe it's not widely available from GPs. But what happens when GPs catch up and it's like a kind of commonly prescribed thing, assuming that the evidence like bears that out?
Yeah, this is a good point. So I think this is particularly applicable in the UK or more like socialized healthcare systems. Maybe in the US it's different. I've certainly heard that a lot of people in the US are on these already. And I believe in the UK, maybe they are approved for just weight loss, although actually don't quote me on that. That could be wrong. But I think the benefit is that it's very difficult, especially in a pressured socialized healthcare system like the NHS, to just book appointments for preventative stuff or be like, yeah, I'm basically healthy, I'm fine, but I want to lose weight. Like, I don't know what the wait list will be for your GP to do that, but I imagine it's quite long. Secondly, this is a bit of a tangent, but I'm really big on these single issue clinics that are cropping up. So you see a lot in mental health and weight loss and hair loss and things. And what I like about them is that basically medicine is quite messy. So no one will fit the textbook definition of diabetes or heart failure. Everyone will have like 5 or 6 different issues that are like interfacing with their life at home and various other things. So it doesn't really fit that mold. But what I like about these businesses, and maybe it's not the most ethical or moral thing to be saying, but they just basically focus on a specific issue. They say, look, you're losing your hair, you want to get your hair back, or you're too fat, so you want to lose weight, or whatever. They just focus on one issue and they fit it. And I think that makes, from a monetary perspective, it just makes it a bit cleaner and easier, and it's quicker to be seen. So let me give you another example that I think is really cool. So there's this company in the UK called Psychiatry-UK. Like I think that's the domain and the name of the company as well. So Chris, so if you have a kid in the UK and you think they have ADHD, do you know what the waitlist time is like to get them assessed by a psychiatrist?
I don't know, but I imagine it's long. Like 10 weeks?
Yeah.
A few months?
No, okay, no. Okay, thanks. You set me up well there. So it's actually it's 7 years, up to 7 years.
So as well, okay.
So like
Wow.
probably by that time, it's kind of game over in terms of any intervention that could have helped them. They're probably an adult by then. But anyway, yeah. So wait times are up to 7 years. So this company, literally all they do is they assess people. So they do like an online consult with a psychiatrist and they assess them for ADHD. And then I believe they prescribe kind of a starting dose of the medication or therapy or whatever they need. And then they hand them back to their kind of a general practice or primary care person. So just through this single issue, they do a consult. So I think they charge something like £360 if you do it privately, or I don't know what they're charging the NHS. But what I really like about this, so I was looking at the Companies House like accounts for this company, and it was kind of difficult to work out exactly how much they were making. But it seems like in 2022 they probably made upwards of £10 million, and they've about doubled since 2021. So they're growing phenomenally fast. And just to think that they have tackled this single issue, like this single problem in the workflow, and they're making so much money off it, it's very cool. So I'm really interested in these companies, and I think the biggest opportunities for these kind of single issue online clinics are things in probably dermatology, probably psychiatry, and I think weight loss maybe interfaces a bit with like kind of like mental health, but also physical health. But yeah, I think these are like the big opportunities. Yeah, what do you think of all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense that there's a lot of like conditions that affect a lot of people, and there's therefore like a big potential market size. And by going direct to consumer, you can obviously go direct to the people who are like willing to pay. I think one issue just to be like careful with in a healthcare context here is, I guess around the like risk of kind of overdiagnosing or being like too profits driven in this kind of context. So for example, with ADHD, there's like some concern, right, that maybe too many people are being diagnosed with ADHD, and that might, or even that maybe there's other conditions as well, right, that it might be the case that diagnosing more people with this condition and putting more medication is actually not like in their best interest in the majority of cases. And so, yeah, there's a risk that you're setting a business which, okay, you're helping people get their ADHD medication, get those diagnoses, but I think you have to be careful not to be basically too profit driven in this kind of context, because you can end up with too many people being on medications that actually might not be the right thing for them, even if they think that they should be taking it. And this is one of the things actually that I think is quite nice about UK, like just from my experiences, is that GPs generally are quite good at saying no to things that the patient wants, but you kind of know probably that it's not really the right thing for them to have. And I think part of it is because they don't have the same sort of like profit incentive structure that maybe other countries like US, they might find it a bit harder to say no at some kind of intervention or some kind of prescription. But that being said, like, as long as you can navigate that, then I think you can concretely, like, if the waiting list is 7 years and people want to get assessed by ADHD and you're like assessing it properly and not being like unduly influenced by potential profits, then I think it's like you're having a good impact, right?
Yeah. So the one thing I've learned from primary care and working in secondary care and things is that when someone comes in asking for something as a patient, it's super easy to give them what they want. If that means that you need to give them an opioid for like chronic pain or antibiotics for a viral illness, it's like the easy thing to just give it to them. I can definitely see how these online clinics, which are incentivized, maybe they raise money as well, they've got like some incentives to grow quickly, like why they might be more inclined to kind of please the customer per se. There's a company in the US called Cerebral, which I think does something similar. It was valued at $5 billion. And there's another one called Done as well. And they had what I believe is a federal investigation, at least one of them did, into their practice essentially. And one of them, I believe, I think the criticism was that they were over prescribing like Adderall and Ritalin and some of these stimulants that are given for ADHD. So that was certainly a criticism they received. I don't know what happened from that, but I can definitely see that happening here as well. Yeah,
I think ultimately it's probably not something that is impossible to overcome, but I mean, it's always a risk, right? Like if your business is very much centered around this as like the main profit generating mechanism, then it's a challenge. I mean, maybe you could make like a different funding structure, which is that people pay for the consultation, but there's like no payment for the actual like prescriptions. Like kind of like basically decouple the the financial incentives with the end output of the consultation. So your metrics are more related to, okay, how many people are you seeing? How like are you assessing them fully or whatever? Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, interesting. Although I suspect just from word of mouth and keeping customers happy, I suspect the ones that are more kind of laissez-faire with prescriptions and things are the ones that are going to come out on top. But maybe being too cynical there.
Yeah, no, you might be right. You might be right. Yeah.
Do you have time for one more idea?
Yeah. Which one are you going to do?
I was going to do your cross-border healthcare idea. Although if you want to do a different one, we can do that as well.
Yeah, I think we're good. I think let's do that one, and then yeah, and then we should be good.
Final round. Fight.
Okay, so Chris, this is actually your idea that I'm pitching, but you're kind of the deadbeat dad who had this idea and then abandoned it, and then I'm kind of the person who's kind of picked up the kid and looking after it now because I think it's a great idea. So essentially, the problem is that there's a lot of immigrants who've moved from India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, just wherever, and they've moved to basically developed nations like the UK, US, Canada, and they have families back home, and often those are elderly parents with possibly a limited family support structure back home. And there's lots of like cultural stuff that ties into this as well. So they're in a position where they probably have a lot of money, especially compared to back home. But they're like geographically, they're just in the wrong area. So they can't really look after their parents how they want to. And in these cultures, there's often a big emphasis on kind of caring for your elderly parents. And there's a big expectation and a lot of responsibility. So again, going back to the 7 deadly sins framework, I don't know if responsibility is a 7 deadly sin, but it's kind of like a really core need that people have to like look after their elderly parents, which is a great thing. The other problem is that back home in these countries, there's not like in the UK, US, Canada, etc. There are guidelines that are kind of decided by a load of experts, and they decide, okay, if you have diabetes and your blood sugar is at this level, take this drug first, then this drug, then next drug. Back home, I think medicine tends to be more of an art. There's certainly a lot of charlatans. There's a lot of like bad medicine. There's just a lot of variety, essentially. A lot of good medicine as well. But basically, your parents could be really like being mismanaged. They could just have completely random medications with like terrible side effect profiles that they shouldn't be on, and you wouldn't really know, especially if you're not medical. Secondly, like if one of your parents gets ill back home, just getting them to hospital, like maybe there is an ambulance service, maybe there's not, maybe there's private ambulances, like maybe someone needs to sit with them, maybe someone needs to advocate for them a bit when they're in hospital. So there's lots of these problems. Now, the solution that you kind of worked on initially, and maybe you want to talk about it more, but you called it Jappi Day, which I think means hug. And there's essentially a kind of what I think is like a subscription service. So say a doctor or someone comes to your parents every month, they kind of check up on them, see how their health's doing, maybe do some basic checks, and then write up a report that comes back to you. And then the thought would be that then if, you pay a monthly fee for that, and then if they need more kind of secondary care or other input, then that doctor can sort that out with trusted people back home. And all of this is managed for you. It's in like a nice kind of, Deliveroo, Uber-esque dashboard that's super easy to use. And you're kind of like, you don't have as much of a headache, or you don't have as much kind of guilt and worry about your parents because they're being looked after. There's certainly like another level you could add on to that where they could maybe help with different chores or different jobs people have back home. And just to kind of talk about, because this might sound a bit niche, but I actually think it's a huge opportunity, like just to talk about the kind of the market size. So in Pakistan, I think there are like, that's where I'm from. So there's over 300 million people. 8 million of them are overseas Pakistanis. They live abroad and predominantly in kind of well-off nations. In India, I think there's like 1 billion people, and 32 million Indians live abroad. Then when you add in like, Southeast Asia, Africa, just all of these other places, you get a really big market. And let's say just in the US, 40 million first generation immigrants. So those are people who kind of, fresh. They've just moved to the US. So imagine you even get 1% of those. That's 400,000 people just in the US. So yeah, I think this is an absolutely amazing idea, and I'm really keen for myself or someone to work on it because I think it's so good. But yeah, Chris, do you want to talk about it, and maybe also talk about some of, because you worked on it. So what were kind of some of the problems that didn't work?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's definitely, it's a super interesting problem, and it capitalizes on a lot of interesting trends that exist today for sure. I think, and as you kind of pointed to, the fact that there's like increasingly an international world, and there's a lot of these cultural needs to standardize healthcare. Well, there's a lot of cultural needs around caring for your relatives, and there's also the need to like standardize healthcare in like parts of the developing world, which is much less standardized than it is in like developed world. So yeah, I think I share the view. This is like a very exciting, interesting area to play in, and I think that people should build companies here. There's definitely some challenges with it, which don't like fully kill the idea. But I think one of the challenges is around like customer acquisition, because if you consider that, yes, there's like a lot of, for example, Pakistanis in this case, and there's a lot of Pakistanis living abroad. But then if you go to any particular location abroad, like the majority of people there are not overseas Pakistanis, right? So you're kind of trying to find the needle in the haystack a little bit, because yeah, a lot of like the traditional ways in which you might reach out to people of anything like kind of geographical based, you're already like kind of struggling to find that particular individual. Now, obviously, it changes a bit with the internet because you can do more targeted like approaches via the internet, but that's one thing. But then also, if you kind of consider even within that, there's like a subsegment of maybe like in Bradford in the UK, which is like a small to medium sized city, there'll be a lot of Pakistanis. But then actually, it's not just criteria that needs to be a Pakistani living somewhere, like in Bradford or in the UK more broadly. They also need to be somebody who then meets the criteria of having an elderly relative over in Pakistan, and that elderly relative also needs to need the services that you're offering, which initially, like kind of general principle startups usually like focus on like really a few specific things, and maybe you can expand later. But let's say you pick like one specific problem, which is that you want GPs to go and check in on people who have chronic conditions, right? Like let's say that was your niche. You're kind of going like a niche within a niche within a niche, right? Because you're looking at people who are from Pakistan, who are living abroad, who have a relative that's back in Pakistan, and that relative also then has to have like a chronic condition. So you're already like really serving a small niche, and it just makes it a little bit harder for the VC-backed like fast scale type companies. So I even wonder if you were doing this kind of idea to not necessarily go the VC-backed route from the beginning and just kind of try and build it from the ground up. And if you can get like some good traction with that community and get a way to engage with the people who want this kind of service, I think then I think you could build a pretty nice business here from the ground up. And obviously Pakistan is just one example. Like there's many countries where they have this diaspora, they have this cultural expectation to help look after relatives. Our generation is kind of, I've heard described as the sandwich generation, which is that we're looking after our kids. We also like now have our relatives who are like aging that we also have responsibilities for. So there's like increasing pressures there. There's a lot of people who, work, they're doing like long hours, and they might not have as much time to like really check in on their parents as they would want to, or maybe they have kids that kind of occupy the time as well. So yeah, I think it's a nice opportunity. Like I think I also share the interest. In our case, yeah, I mean I decided not to work on this for a few reasons. I think one part of it is that it's a harder like kind of to go the VC route, where I was very much looking at building like a scale fast VC backed company. There probably is a way to do it. But yeah, like it feels less like one of those ideas and more like a kind of ground up business basically.
Yeah. The one thing I will say is that, talking about the niche within a niche, I certainly agree with that. But I think the one benefit is that it's not like a niche of like, say you're trying to find like, I don't know, people into keeping reptiles, and they'll all be spread across the country in like random villages, like just, 1-2 people in each village. You're looking at a niche which is like, once you crack that community, everyone kind of knows everyone. Like even with my parents, you mentioned someone from Pakistan who's a doctor or something and lives down south, they'll kind of know a friend of a friend. So I think it's one of those where if you crack into like that community, that's certainly the hard bit. But I think once you do that, like through word of mouth and things, you could certainly spread. But yeah, I do recognize that it is a niche within a niche. On the VC point of view, I think I agree with you. I don't know how much it fits into the VC kind of like blitzscale framework. Although I guess one of the benefits is that if you kept it light and offered, you were more of a matchmaking service initially rather than like this full-on platform. So essentially you were just connecting people here to clinics in their home country and kind of sitting as the middleman between those two things. You could potentially kind of be earning money from day one and bootstrap the whole thing. So in some ways that's almost a strength. I certainly think you'd need, I don't know, like 100K or something just to fly over to those places and just set up the links. But potentially you wouldn't need loads and loads of like an investment. But yeah, what you've kind of I still haven't cracked this with you. Is why was it not a good idea? Because you were partnered with Ali, who's Pakistani, I believe, as well. So there was a bit of that. You probably would have cracked the communities, at least as an initial point of view. But like, what did you not like about the idea that meant that you didn't go after it?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there were a few other elements. I also touched on this, the kind of customer acquisition side, which is like a non-trivial challenge. Another thing here also is actually the existing healthcare provision on the ground in Pakistan. So we kind of felt that actually the place where you would add the most value, and from the people that we spoke to, was really around providing a kind of like almost a GP primary care type check-in with elderly relatives. Because with the clinic referral stuff kind of already exists to a large extent, which will help people like find the clinics that they go to, and people will just like pick up the phone and call them. And that sort of system is in place. So there's not a strong pain point there necessarily. But actually with like getting someone to come visit you in your own home, check up on your health and create some kind of structured report, that makes a lot of sense. But one of the issues here really is like right now, GP as a specialty is not really a thing in Pakistan. Like there's not trained GPs who are just waiting for like a job or to do like some remote work or to do some home visits. Like there's variation in the like level of training that different people have, and there's not this as I understand, it's not a clear-cut divide between like doctors and not doctors in the way that like UK is like, okay, I'm a doctor versus I'm not. There's a lot of people who will have some kind of like general medical experience and might offer these kind of services, but actually they're not like medically qualified. And likewise, you have people who are medically qualified, but maybe they've only worked in hospitals and they don't really have like any GP experience. And when you look at other services that offer these kinds of platforms, the main critique the customers have is like variability in the quality of the doctors and the ability to trust the doctors. And so if you're building a company here, you really need to be able to actually create that trust for the doctors. But now if you're creating that trust for the doctors, because this is key, right? Like if you're living abroad and you're like arranging a doctor to go and look after your relative, like you really have to trust that doctor. You're not being able to see them face to face. Like, you're kind of letting that doctor go into your family's home and like examine them and all this kind of thing. And you're kind of putting your name on that as the son, daughter who's arranging that care. But the issue with the trust side is it's very hard to build a scalable company where you like have that full trust of the doctors that are then going and providing those services. Particularly if like the kind of pool of doctors that you're tapping into is not really set up to provide this kind of care. So there's a bit of a transformation required, which would maybe be like, I don't know, training people more around like general practice or like really again, kind of not a customer acquisition, but like a doctor acquisition play here of trying to find the doctors who actually have the right experience, the right kind of skill set and the right availability to then actually go and deliver these visits as well. So there's another challenge on that side. So I think it's really, it's this challenge of like matching things. And you add in the complexity of the fact that, again, on the supply side, you also have these geographical restrictions. So I mentioned, you need to find somebody in the UK who has a relative who needs this kind of like care, but then they might have a relative in Lahore and someone else might have a relative in like Karachi, and then you need someone on the ground to deliver those visits, and that's very different. And then that person also needs to meet the requirements of being like an appropriate doctor. And so, I think it's just ultimately like there's a lot of logistical challenges around providing this kind of service and differentiating yourself on the like level of trust and reputation of the doctors, because that's really, I think the company would like kind of live or die on that reputation, and it'd be like very hard to take steps to really ensure that you have that trust and that like even you can like trust people who's delivering the care, right? So that's kind of those I think are some of the main reasons we sort of moved away from it. I think there's a lot of good things about it, and I think maybe someone will come in and build something great in the space, but there's a lot of like weeds to go through of figuring out, okay, well, how do we actually like establish this trust? How do we verify the doctors? How do we maybe even train them, or maybe we even need to do something where you partner them with doctors abroad who are like GPs and have more GP experience to help them like upskill as GPs. And then once you've done that, how do you like retain them? And these kind of logistical things basically.
Yeah, totally agree. I spoke to my dad who said the exact same thing, that general practice or primary care doesn't really exist as a specialty. Neither does geriatrics really. You just go straight to the specialty that you want. If you have a cardiology problem, you speak directly to the cardiologist. So it doesn't exist. Also just to add the huge regulatory and litigation kind of burden that you have, where if one of your doctors sees an elderly relative one day and then they die the next day, potentially that was going to happen anyway. But people get upset, and you might bear the brunt of that. The last kind of two benefits I didn't touch on was that there's a kind of currency arbitrage opportunity where money here is, or in the UK or the US, is worth a lot more back home. So the figures when I had a quick look at this, is like kind of like the equivalent of like a quick GP consultation. That would be about 1,000 rupees, which I think is about £7 or £8. Specialist one might be about the equivalent of £30 or £40. So there's certainly a massive arbitrage there where rich Westerners are paying, and then you're getting care from these countries. So it's like, that's quite nice. Secondly, I guess all these challenges in some ways are a very good moat to have. And the kind of like, is the juice worth the squeeze? But in another sense, you're also not creating the next kind of dermatology AI startup, which kind of everyone can do. You're doing something that's actually really difficult. And if it does work out, then potentially you've got a really defensible moat because you've got all those relationships and that brand and reputation and trust. So yeah, I think a difficult one. But yeah, I think whoever does it, I think they'll make a lot of money, and I think it'll be really cool.
Yeah, I agree.
Nice. Shall we finish up then? So do you want to just plug yourself, where people can find you?
Yeah, sure. So I think best place to find me would be my personal website, which is just chrislovejoy.me, chrislovejoy.me. I have talk about all the different projects I'm working on and link away to other like socials and stuff there. But that'd be the best place to go. Fine.
And you can find all my stuff at bigpicturemedicine.co.uk, all on YouTube, on all podcasting networks, etc. And yeah, if you enjoyed this format, then let me know, tweet at me or email me at hi@musti.io. And if you're someone who has some ideas to discuss as well, then let me know as well, and we can definitely do something together. Okay, man. Thanks a lot. I'll stop recording.
Cool. This was fun. Take care.